Thank you, Kat, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you all for being here. It's really, truly special to be meeting so many of you for this first time in this virtual space. So I truly honor the fact that you've chosen to show up for yourself today on a weekend, on a Saturday, to spend time here with us. We don't take that for granted. And we're so grateful to be here with you. So before we dive right in, I just want to start with a few questions. Okay. And you can raise your hand, you can give me a thumbs up, you can type it in the chat if you'd like, but who here has ever said yes when you really wanted to say no? I have, for sure. What about who here has agreed to something and then instantly regretted it? You got that like, ugh, that feeling in your gut that's like, why did I say that? Also me. I also have done that. Who here has maybe bitten your tongue to avoid conflict, even though every part of you wanted to speak up? I've done that too. Me too. So I guess what I'm curious about is have any of you that have raised your hands, have any of you ever stopped to ask yourself why? Why do you do those things? Why do we overgive? Why do we overexplain? Why do we overaccommodate? Sometimes I know for a long time I didn't even realize it was happening. Sometimes we don't realize it's happening, right? So today what I'd like to do is to share with you what happened for me when I finally started asking those questions of myself. Okay, so again, my name is Brandy and I am a divorce recovery coach. I am the CEO and founder of Divorce Divas LLC, where I help women rebuild their sense of self and confidence after divorce so that they can create the life that they deserve, right? Oftentimes in difficult co-parenting situations which require firm boundaries. And I am so grateful to say that I get to do this meaningful work, but I'll be honest, it wasn't always this way. So for me, after my divorce, I had thought the hardest part was over and that I would finally feel free. Free from the loneliness of being in a loveless marriage, right? Free from walking on eggshells, free from the constant arguments and disappointments. But I had no idea that the challenges were actually just beginning. And that was because I quickly learned that I had no idea how to co-parent or how to lead my home and my children or how to even respect myself. The truth was, I had no idea what boundaries were at all. I didn't know I didn't have them. I didn't know what they were. I was completely clueless, right? And nor did I realize that they were actually the key to the sense of freedom that I desired. Okay, so here's what life looked like for me 6 years ago after my divorce. I often said yes when I wanted to say no to my ex, to my kids, to my family. To my ex, it would look like, for example, if my kids forgot something at my house on my parenting time, he'd call me up, ask if I could bring it to his house, and I would. I would take it over there, even if it inconvenienced me. Okay. It also looked like when my kids would come over from their dads, they would bring their habits into my home and I would just allow it. My lifestyle is very different from their dad's. I'm very active. I don't really ever have my TV on. My kids now today say, why do we even have a TV, Mom? We never use it. But 6 years ago, that's not how I operated. They would come over, and now you have to realize that their dad kept the marital home. So that made me feel, I think, a little bit like, how do I set different boundaries when all they've ever known was what was over there? But regardless, I learned how to do it. We'll get there. Because when they used to come over, they would get on my TV and get on their YouTube and get on their Xbox, play the video games. And I remember one time in particular when my son was playing his video game and talking to his friends on the phone. I actually had a headset, actually, come to think of it. But he had taken over what felt like my whole house because my house isn't that big. He was in the living room and I had like backed myself up into the corner of my kitchen and I was just like watching this, like, how could this be happening? And I actually called up my friend and I was like, can you believe that my son is doing this? I felt powerless in my own home. I thought I had escaped this behavior when I divorced their dad, right? And my friend was perfect. I needed to hear exactly what she said. She said, "You do realize you're allowed to say no, Brandy. It is your home." And I was like, "Wow, you're right." And so eventually I did, but we'll get there in a minute. Another way 6 years ago not having boundaries showed up in my life is that I let guilt run my parenting decisions, right? I had guilt for feeling like I split up their family, right? Because I was the one that had moved out of the house, right? And so while I was here in my home on the times that they weren't here, I was trying to establish healthy habits for myself. I was going outside often. I was doing yoga. I was running. I was eating healthy. But then they would come over to my house and I wouldn't do those things. Right? Odd, right? I would fall back into old patterns of just allowing them to behave the way they did at their dad's, right? While also not doing what I was doing when they weren't here. I had another friend that told me, Brandy, your kids don't even really know who you are because you don't show up as yourself when they're here. And that's not fair to them. It wasn't fair to me, right? And so that's why boundaries are so important because they help us live in our true authenticity, right? What I finally realized was that instead of leading from my values, because again, I still didn't know what boundaries were at this time, I was allowing chaos into my home, right? My sacred space. And at the time, I felt powerless to change anything. And while I thought I was keeping the peace, because that's what I thought I was doing, I was really sacrificing myself and my peace. I was self-abandoning and self-neglecting. All of the things that I did in my marriage, I continued to do after my divorce in my own home. The truth is, I wasn't powerless, right? I was allowing this because I didn't have any boundaries, right? And that it took a toll. It did. It was, the result was I was exhausted. I was resentful. I barely recognized myself. I wasn't the mom I wanted to be. And you know what? My kids were watching. They were learning from me that my needs didn't matter. And by extension, because we model for our children, they were learning that their needs didn't matter. And they were also learning from me that I didn't respect myself. And so they didn't have to respect me either. That was not okay with me. So the wake up call, because we usually get a wake up call, right? Eventually, and they're not usually very gentle. So for me, after living this way for about 4 years, 4 years, right? That's crazy. By the way, that's why I do this work now because nobody deserves to live in that kind of chaos for 4 years when there is something that you can do about it, when there are skills and techniques and strategies that you can learn. Okay. But for me, it took about 4 years and I finally had my breaking point. And really, there were two situations that led up to that. One was there was an incident where my ex completely disrespected me in my own home right in front of my kids. It wasn't the first time. It did end up being the last, and we'll cover that a bit in a bit more detail in a minute, okay? But not too long before that happened, I had taken my kids on a trip to Arizona to visit my sister. And while we were there, they acted out in a way that was quite honestly embarrassing to me, and my sister was stunned. And by this time, they weren't little kids anymore. This was about 4 years post-divorce, so they were 9 and 11. Old enough to know better. Old enough to know how to respect someone in their own home. Because we were guests in my sister's home. Old enough to know how to listen to their mom. Old enough to know how to behave in an airport and on an airplane, right? And while it was embarrassing and frustrating, I just felt sad for my kids because I had a realization that I hadn't taught them, I hadn't shown them properly how to respect somebody else because I hadn't shown them how to respect me through boundaries and how I wanted to be respected, right? So I felt like I had let them down because as their mother, that is my responsibility, right? And I want to be honest with you because this is something that comes up a lot with the women that I work with. When we start to have these realizations, it's frustrating, right? Because I do try to model respect and I had things to learn and I've been implementing them and things have gotten better. But it's frustrating to me and others that I've worked with when I think of how they are modeled the complete opposite 50% of the time in their other home, right? They're basically modeled disrespect in their other home, right? So I used to think to myself, what good does it do to even make these changes? because they're just seeing the complete opposite the rest of the time in the other home, right? And I'm not saying that's not frustrating, it is, but here's the problem with that mentality. And I say this with compassion, not judgment, because I can hold myself in compassion now too. And I always encourage the women that I work with to do the same when we have these thoughts and feelings, right? When we approach things in that way, we allow ourselves to be a victim of circumstance, right? And as a victim, we are powerless. But with boundaries, we take our power back and we shift into the victor or the leader role of our lives, right? And so here's what I want to share with you today. So, even in these difficult circumstances that so many of us find ourselves in, we still deserve boundaries. We still deserve to be respected. And our kids do deserve to learn that from us. Okay. In an ideal world, sure, they would learn it from both parents. But if they're not, it's even more important that we step in and model it ourselves because they need to learn it from somewhere, right? It's not fair, but it is still a choice. And it is one I'm telling you that can truly change everything. Okay. So, for me, my real turning point was that trip to Arizona. It was when my ex showed up in my home and completely disrespected me in front of them. And I said, you know what? We cannot continue to live this way. I need to figure out what to do. I need to set some boundaries. We need to change some things around here. Because by that time, I realized boundaries weren't optional. They were truly the foundation for my healing, for my parenting, and for my self-worth. Okay. And once I recognized that, everything shifted. Everything. I'm telling you. I went from feeling like a victim of the circumstances, hoping things would change, hoping my ex would eventually get it, to becoming the victor, right? The leader. I took ownership of what I was allowing and I decided to choose differently. Okay. And I started small and consistent at first, right? Because consistency builds momentum and that builds confidence because it's hard and uncomfortable at first when something is new, right? But I started saying no and meaning it. It was hard for my kids at first, right? There's a bit of bargaining back and forth. And I just said no. No is a full sentence. Whether you are talking to your kids, an ex, your boss, a friend, you can say no and stand firm in that. That's a boundary. Remember at the beginning when we were all kind of raising our hands, or some of us, and we were saying, "Yeah, I say yes a lot when I want to say no." Nope, it's okay for you to say no. It's okay for you to choose you. That's a boundary. Okay. I also started leading my home from my values instead of from the chaos and patterns and habits that they were bringing from their other home. So guess what? I took away the Xbox. I totally did. To this day, my kids have not seen it. It's in my bedroom. We don't use it. I never should have been in my home. It actually came as a free gift from my internet provider. Never should have been in my home. I set chores and expectations. Like they know every day what they need to do before they even ask to do the fun stuff, to hang out with the friends, to play with the friends, right? And when it came to that incident with my ex in my home, I took action on that too. Bigger action because it required a bigger action, but I filed a report with the police because I wanted to create a neutral exchange place in public to make it nearly impossible for him to show up like in that way, in that manner, that disrespectful manner to me again. Okay. So I made it crystal clear we are not to set foot on each other's properties. That's what I needed to feel safe. Now, let me tell you, did it look weird to my kids at first? Yes, it did. Did they understand completely? No, they didn't. But I stood firm in my boundaries and said, this is what I need to feel safe. And that is what is best for all of us. Because as a mom, if we don't feel safe around our kids, it's not good to them either. Okay? You are allowed to do what you need to do for you to feel safe. Okay? So let me tell you, boundaries truly changed everything for me. They gave me my energy back. They ended the endless arguments with my ex. They gave my kids the consistency that they desperately needed. And most importantly, they gave me back. I went from feeling like that victim of circumstances to really feeling empowered in my life and understanding that there are things that I can do for me and that's okay. So that's why I teach this work now because boundaries are truly the foundation, the piece that makes all of the rest of healing possible because they are the standards in which you set for yourself and for what you allow in your life. You have the power and control over what you allow in your life. Okay. And I have worked with women over the past few years and taught this, right? And what I've noticed is there's a common theme, and it's not just divorced women who need help with boundaries and support with boundaries. It's also single women. It's also married women, right? It's a lot of women because so many of us never learned when we were young to be easy on ourselves, right? We never learned when we were young to set boundaries, excuse me. We were taught to prioritize other people's needs, right? We were taught to people please. And so, as you were starting to come to awareness and realize that maybe you have had some of those patterns that maybe are no longer serving you, just be easy with yourself and have compassion with yourself, okay? That's how we heal by accepting with love and compassion so that we can then learn and make changes, okay? So, today, we are going to focus on three main types of boundaries. Okay, we are going to focus on boundaries with yourself because, yes, we need them with ourselves too, so we can stop saying yes when we want to say no. We are going to talk about boundaries with others, like I needed them with my kids and with my ex. We need boundaries with just about everybody, to be honest, and that's okay. That's how we create healthy relationships. And then we're also going to talk about boundaries with time. So you can stop feeling guilty when you decide not to answer an email past 6 p.m. Okay. But before we do that, I do want to talk about what boundaries are not. So a few myths about boundaries. Okay. One of the biggest myths I often hear is if I set boundaries, I'm selfish or I will hurt my kids or I'll make things worse. Okay. And here's the mistake that this creates. That's why we overgive. That's why we say yes when we mean no. That's why we put everyone else's needs and comfort above our own. Here's the truth. Boundaries are not selfish. They are love in action. They're self-love and then they're love for others because you're showing people what you need to feel safe to remain relationships and interactions with them, right? They are also loved because they teach our kids that respecting ourselves is normal. So they create more peace, not less. Okay, so I want to teach you all what I call the boundary guilt reframe. Okay, so this is where we take the myth and we reframe it into a powerful truth. Okay, so the myth is if I set this boundary, I'm hurting them. Now we're gonna flip it. If I don't set this boundary, I'm teaching them it's okay for people to hurt me. Let that sink in for a minute. Why should we do things for everybody else? Why are we not just as important? We are. That's why we're learning about boundaries, right? But I want us to practice together. So grab a pen and a paper, or if you feel comfortable and brave and you want to type it in the chat, go right ahead. But I want you to think of one guilty thought you've had about setting a boundary. Maybe if I say no, I'll look like the bad guy or whatever it may be. Okay. And then I want you to flip it. If I don't say no, if it's the example of I'll be the bad guy, I'll look like the bad guy. If I don't say no, I'm hurting myself. I'm being the bad guy to myself, right? Another one could be if you're afraid to set rules with your kids. If I set a rule, my kids will get mad. If I set a rule, my kids won't listen because they don't listen anyway. What about this one? If I don't set a rule, I'm teaching my kids it's okay for people not to respect me. That's not okay, and that's not what you want. This is why we practice this boundary guilt reframe, right? One more myth I want to talk about that I often hear from the women I work with. My ex will never respect my boundaries anyway, so why even bother? And now here's the mistake that this creates. We avoid setting boundaries altogether. We keep hoping and changing or hoping and wishing for someone else to change, right? While we stay stuck in resentment. Like, no, we don't want that either. So, look, we can't control what others do or don't do. We can only control what we choose to do for ourselves, right? Boundaries are not about controlling anyone else, they are about protecting your peace. So instead of waiting for others to change, the shift is I can't control them, but I can control me and I can lead with clarity and consistency. So in my case, that situation I told you earlier when my ex disrespected me in front of my children, I can't control what he says, right? I mean, I've made it to the point where we're not face to face and we won't ever have an interaction like that again. But when they're with him, I can't control what he says to them, right? And I do hear that he says things that are not really very kind, especially that day when he spoke disrespectfully to me in my home. And I forgot to tell you guys, I set a boundary that day too. I said, I don't allow people to speak to me that way. You will need to leave. And by this point, I had been working on boundaries for a while. So I had regulated my nervous system, even though I was feeling, obviously, this wasn't a fun situation. So I was kind of feeling a little like, oh, inside, but on the outside, I had regulated my nervous system and I was able to speak very calmly with him. And I said, I do not allow people to speak to me that way. You will need to leave. And I will tell you, he had never heard that from me before. He was used to me getting upset. He was stunned. And I said it again. We were outside at this point in my yard, and so people could see. And I said it again very calmly, and he laughed. Right now, once he finally did come to get the kids, because it was an exchange day, I know he said some things that were not very kind, and I can't control that. Does it bother me? Of course, I don't like that he says those things to my kids. They don't deserve to hear that. I can't control him though. So choosing to focus on him and what he says and what I can't control just harms me more, right? What did I do that day? I controlled me. I stood firm in my boundary. I modeled self-respect. That's what I did. That's what I can control. And my kids saw that too. You impact your kids too, which is why we are learning about boundaries today. Okay. So even if, the people that you need to set these boundaries with never change, you will. You will stop leaking your energy. You will stop carrying resentment, and you will show your kids as well as others what respect looks like. Right? And I just want to say this too. Boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out, right? Think of them more as like doors and windows that let the right things in. Because again, you get to decide what you allow and you get to decide how you show up. Okay? I love thinking of it as boundaries teach your kids and others the standards that you have for yourself. They show others that you don't accept disrespect. And again, if you're a mom, that becomes the model that your kids carry into their own lives. Okay. So I want you to think of a couple of things here. One, what do you want more of in your life right now? Is it peace? Is it respect? Maybe time? Or when do you notice that you feel the most uplifted and light? Let's talk about that actually. When do you feel like, you know what, I can be totally myself here. I don't feel judged. I'm happy and free to be me. Think about who you feel that way around. That is when a boundary is being honored, right? Your body always tells you the truth. So start paying attention to how you feel in certain situations and with certain people. Okay. Now let me ask you this. Where do you feel the most drained? Where and around who do you feel like you have to shrink yourself? Where do you feel restricted? Because your body will tell you where a boundary is needed. Again, if you feel like you have to shrink and feel restricted, that means a boundary is being crossed or you need to set one, right? Yeah. So let's do this. I want to talk about the three main types of boundaries that you need to practice, okay? So we'll start boundaries with yourself because again, you do need boundaries with yourself. So I want you to think of a boundary with yourself as really a commitment that you make and keep with yourself. It's about honoring your own limits, your needs, and your values. So for example, you may choose not to check your ex's social media, right? That's a commitment to protect your peace. You may choose to read a new self-help book every morning instead of scrolling on Instagram or Facebook. That's a commitment to your energy. You may choose to set aside 20 minutes a day for journaling or movement. That's a commitment to your well-being, right? Refusing to speak to yourself in self-critical ways is another one that I love, right? Noticing when you start to have that kind of inner critic, that negative voice, and deciding to stop it and switch the thoughts or the narrative, right? Or what about earlier again, when so many of us raise our hands, we're like, oh, we say yes, we want to say no. Because in those situations too, nobody is making you say yes, right? You're choosing to say yes. Have you ever thought about that? So, like, when you feel like you have to say yes, start thinking about why, right? Like, why do I feel like this? We actually talked a little bit about it earlier. Something that can help you. Next time you feel like you have to say yes, remind yourself of the boundary guilt reframe. Remember? And remind yourself that you're not hurting anybody by saying no, but who are you hurting? Yourself, right? So, unlike boundaries with others, where you do teach people how you want to be treated, boundaries with yourself are about teaching yourself how you will honor you, right? So now I'd love for you to reflect and pause for a moment. What is one boundary with yourself that you're already honoring? Maybe it's giving yourself a daily walk. Maybe it's keeping work off your phone at night. What's something that you're already honoring? Yeah, give yourself a moment to jot it down if you'd like. Or you can also maybe type it in the chat if you're feeling brave. One that you're already honoring. And then I want you to think about what is one boundary with yourself that's needed. Maybe it's committing to saying no when you're at capacity or choosing to rest instead of powering through. One that you know you need. Think about situations where you feel heavy or you have to like restrict yourself. Yeah. Yeah, these were wonderful thoughts. Yeah, great, guys. Awesome. So let's talk about boundaries with others now, okay? So, boundary with others is about clearly communicating what you will and won't allow, right? And then following through with your action. Sometimes that's the harder part, but maybe even the most important part because you can't just speak it, you have to follow through with action, right? So again, remember, you cannot control another person's behavior, but you can decide how you will respond when disrespect or overstepping happens. Okay. So just a couple of examples here. A situation where maybe you're speaking to someone on the phone and they're yelling, right? You communicate first. I'm open to this conversation when it's respectful. If yelling continues, I'll end the call. Question. So then what happens when the yelling continues? Do you say it again? I'm open to this conversation when it's respectful. If yelling continues, I'll end the call. Do you say it again? No. What do you do if they keep yelling? Beep. Goodbye. You end the call. Yes, that's that follow through action that's so important when it comes to boundaries. You communicated it, they didn't respect it, you followed through. Okay. Or another situation, when I was having that situation in my home with my ex, I told him and I communicated it very calmly. I do not allow people to talk to me like that. You will need to leave my home and come back when you are calm. And it worked for me in that situation. He left. Now, I didn't want to chance it happening again, which is why I followed behind it with even firmer action and filing the police report and setting the public exchange place. But again, spoke the boundary, followed through with the action, right? Another example might be a friend drops by unannounced when you've asked for notice. You might say, you know what, I love seeing you, but I also need advance notice before visits. Let's plan a time that works for both of us. Okay. And then what do you do then? Do you invite your friend in and continue to chit chat? No, you say goodbye. I love you dearly if you have that sort of relationship, but you'll need to leave, right? It's not mean. That's honoring yourself, right? What about in a situation where a family member pressures you to share details that you're not comfortable with? Maybe they say, did you, what's going on with what, so and so, and they just want to know the information. And maybe you have it, maybe you don't. They don't need to know that. All you gotta say is, look, I'm not going to talk about that. Thanks for understanding. That's it, right? And if they keep pressing you, do you finally give in and say it? No, right? You say, we're going to have to change the conversation. If you can't honor that, then we'll have to end the conversation, right? So, unlike boundaries with self, which are commitments you make to you, to yourself, boundaries with others are about teaching people how to treat you and then backing it up with consistent action. Because remember, you can't control how they will receive or respond to your boundary, right? But you can control how you will. Okay. All right, so now I want you to reflect. What is one boundary that you have with others that you've already communicated and held? Something that you're proud of, maybe with your ex, maybe with your kids, maybe with a friend. Yeah, go ahead and write it in the chat if you feel brave. Or again, remember you can always just write it down for you. Yeah, and then let's talk about oh, what is one boundary with your others that you know is needed? Maybe it is about the tone of conversations, or maybe it is about what gets brought into your home. Maybe it is, um, you just notice and you don't quite understand why that you have to shrink yourself around someone, right? Remember, the body never lies. So if you're doing that, chances are you need a boundary, okay? Because when your boundaries are uplifted, or I'm sorry, boundaries are honored, you feel light and light and uplifted, right? So yeah, take a moment to write that down, share it in the chat if you'd like. Wonderful. You guys are really getting it. Awesome. Okay. So now we're going to talk about boundary with time. We're going to talk about boundary with time. Boundaries with time. So, a boundary with time is all about protecting your most valuable resource, your energy and attention. Time boundaries help you stay aligned with your priorities instead of being pulled in every direction, right? So, an example might be your ex sends late night texts. You communicate the boundary. I'm not available to respond after 8 p.m. I'll reply in the morning. Done. If he sends another one, you just don't answer. No, and you don't engage, right? Another example might be a coworker constantly asks for last minute help. All you have to say is, I can't take this on today. I'll look at it tomorrow or at all, right? Another big one that was a big one for me and my kids, so a boundary with others that I had to set was about bedtime. My kids always wanted to stay up late on a school night because their other home allowed that, right? I had to set a boundary. Bedtime is at 9 p.m. That's all you really gotta say. But if you want to add more, rest is how we take care of ourselves, so we'll stick to that, right? So again, unlike boundaries with self, which are commitments to yourself, or boundaries with others, which is communicating how you'll be treated, time boundaries are all about managing where your hours and energy actually go. So I'd love for you to reflect. What is one time boundary that you already have in place? Maybe it's no work emails after dinner, or maybe it's setting a timer for your social media. What is one boundary that you already have in place? Yep, and you know what I'm going to ask next, don't you? What is one time boundary that is needed? Right? Maybe blocking out time for rest or exercise or for what matters most to you, right? Like, what is something that is needed? So write it down, share it in the chat if you'd like. Let me know. I'm curious. All right, awesome, guys. All right, so I want you to take a moment and reflect on these different types of boundaries. What do you notice about them? Can you only set boundaries with yourself, or does that impact time boundaries? Yeah, like I can say I'm not gonna answer emails after 8 p.m. or 6 p.m., whatever it is. That's a boundary with myself that I'm committing to myself, and also a time boundary, right? What about when you say, I'm not going to allow anyone to speak to me that way? That's a boundary with yourself, right? You're committing to yourself that you're not going to allow someone to speak to you that way. And it's a boundary with others, right? Or the example I used with the bedtime, that was a boundary with others, but also with time. So do you see how you can't only have boundaries in one area? We really have to work on practicing and strengthening boundaries in all of the three areas, right? Because they're all kind of like interconnected, right? Now, I did want to mention something about time, okay? Because I hear a lot of times, from the women that I work with that a lot of times I don't have time for boundaries. I'm already juggling so much. And the truth is, it is a skill, right? It does take practice. Like we just talked about, it's important to be strong in all three categories, right? And that does take practice. But ironically, what we don't realize is that every time we are saying yes when we want to say no, we're already giving away our time, right? So learning to set and maintain boundaries. I mean, does it take time to learn? Sure, just like anything else, right? But ultimately, it doesn't cost you time. It actually gives you your time back, right? You'll stop being pulled into endless arguments at midnight or running yourself ragged trying to please everyone, right? So just think about that. Now, after you leave here today, I want you to really start paying attention in your own life, how you feel around someone or in certain situations. Okay. Do you feel expansive, like you can breathe and be yourself? Or do you feel restrictive, like you have to shrink and make yourself smaller? Because again, remember, your body doesn't lie. You have to just learn to trust it. It will signal to you where boundaries are needed. Okay. All right. So we have learned now about how boundaries show up in three powerful ways, right? With yourself, with others, with your time. And each one is essential. And together, they really truly create the foundation for living with clarity, peace, and self respect. Okay. So even if one is missing, it does, like we mentioned, start to affect the others. But when you strengthen all of them, your whole world begins to shift. Okay. But think about it. Where do you think, which type of boundary do you think you need the most right now? You can type it in the chat. Do you think you need more boundaries with yourself, more boundaries with others, maybe more time boundaries? Just let me know. I'm just curious. While you do that, I do want to just mention I had a client recently who had come to me overwhelmed, not knowing how to set boundaries with her ex. She was mostly focused on boundaries with others, right? But she discovered that it wasn't just about him. She also needed boundaries with herself and with her time. And we worked on scripts and reframes and practiced them together. And she started consistently setting them. And within weeks, she told me she felt calmer and just more positive overall, right? Because that's the difference that boundaries really can make. Okay. Now, let's be honest. But even with all this information, even with clear scripts, boundaries often do feel comfortable at first, right? Why is that? Well, it's because most of us have been conditioned to avoid conflict, to feel guilty for saying no or to fear rejection. That's why up until this point in our life, we haven't really practiced them, right? And then you know what? Inside my coaching program, I do go deeper with women on the why behind that because when you understand why you've struggled to set boundaries in the past, you can begin to heal those patterns and make different choices going forward. That's really what makes boundaries more sustainable. Okay. Now, we don't have time for all that, to unpack all that today, but here's what I do want you to remember. If setting a boundary does feel uncomfortable, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just means you're practicing something new, right? And guess what? With practice, it gets easier. So let's ground this together. I want you to think back to one of the boundaries that you identified earlier that you need to set, maybe with yourself or with others or with your time. Hold that boundary in your mind. And I want you to place a hand on your heart. Okay, let's take 3 slow breaths together. Inhaling through your nose fully, and then exhaling through your mouth. One more time, inhaling through your nose, filling up the lungs fully. Exhale through your mouth. One more time, inhaling through the nose, exhaling through the mouth. Good job. Keeping your hand there. And I just want you to repeat silently as you just allow the breath to return to its natural rhythm. I am safe to hold this boundary. I am safe to hold this boundary. Yeah. And notice how that feels to connect with that intention in your body. This is how you begin building the strength to carry boundaries into your daily life. Okay. So here's the good news. Boundaries really can change everything, right? With yourself, they restore your confidence. With others, they protect your peace. With time, they give you your life back. And I do know that some of you might be thinking, look, Brandy, my situation is totally different. My ex is high conflict. My kids push back. My family doesn't respect me. And you know what? I get it because guess what? I thought the same thing. And I've had clients say those exact same things to me. One, even just recently, told me it would never work for her, that her ex would never change. Her kids were too set in their ways. But again, within just a few weeks of practicing boundaries, she told me she was starting to feel like herself again. Because boundaries aren't about controlling other people, right? And she did say it's still a work in progress with her kids and her ex, but she had more self-respect for herself, right? Which led to more confidence, which led to more energy, and even her kids starting to respect her more. Okay. Another client who told me she had been previously married twice. She told me she wished she had learned about boundaries 20 years ago when she first divorced her first husband. And I told her the same thing I share with all of you. While we cannot change the past, we can take action today to make changes that will promise us a brighter future tomorrow. That's the power of boundaries. They're not about changing anyone else. They're about changing how you show up. And when you change and the way you show up, everything around you starts to shift too. Okay. They really do give you your power back. They give you back the control over your life as you shift from seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances to a leader of your life. Okay. And I'm living proof too. Remember, I went 4 years after my divorce living in chaos to living in clarity and peace in like a sliver of that time. And it was not because my ex changed, it was because I did. I finally stopped waiting for others to respect me and I started respecting myself. And if I can do it, so can you. Okay. And so while over the past few years I've had the privilege of working with so many women, here's what I've realized. Again, it's not just divorced women that need this work. It's single women, it's married women, it's women who are moms, women who are not moms. So if what I've shared today resonates with you, I'd love to invite you all to take the next step. Is that okay if I offer an invitation to you all today? Okay, great. On Saturday, October 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm hosting the live boundary workshop called Boundaries That Set You Free. It's not just a talk, we're actually going to practice together. You'll learn how to identify whether a boundary is missing with yourself, with others, or with your time. I will teach you simple scripts to say no without guilt, even when others push back. You will learn tools to regulate your emotions when boundaries feel uncomfortable. And you will learn how to model healthy self-respect for your kids and others, okay? You'll also get my Boundaries That Set You Free workbook and a live Q&A with me, okay? And now here's why this is so special, because normally this kind of deep boundary work is only available inside my private one-to-one coaching program. And a 90-minute workshop like this is typically valued at $97, okay? But because this is a special summit, you can join. I'm inviting you all to join for only $47. I'm going to put a QR code up on the screen in a moment, and you can just take a picture of that, and then we'll post the link in the chat as well. And you'll see that the discount is already applied. Okay. And look, I know sometimes we hesitate to spend money on ourselves, but let me reframe this. Not having boundaries is already costing you in your energy and your peace, and even in the example that your kids are seeing. Okay. $47, that's less than a dinner out, right? And we oftentimes spend that so willingly without any returns. But this workshop is really an investment in your freedom and your future. Okay, and I do also want to acknowledge another thing. And I know it's another Saturday, but you've already chosen to spend part of your weekend here today. And so that tells me how committed you are to your growth, and I don't take that for granted. Okay, and while I do know life is full and your time is precious, here's the truth. Not having boundaries is already costing you and hours, with the endless arguments. This workshop is really designed to give you your hours back because once you know how to set and hold clear boundaries, you stop wasting time in conflict and you start living in peace. So if you're ready to stop leaking energy, stop carrying resentment, and start leading your life with clarity and peace, register for the Boundaries That Set You Free workshop today, okay? Because today's presentation gives you insights, right? It gave you insights, but the workshop will give you the start to the transformation that you desire and that you deserve, right? You deserve to rebuild your life with peace, clarity, and strength. And you deserve to become the victor, not the victim, okay? Your boundaries are not just for you. Remember, they're a gift to your children, your relationships, and your future self, okay? So let me put that QR code in. I want to pull it up here on my screen so you all can see it and take a picture. Just have to screen share for a moment. Here it is. Can you all see that? Yeah. Oh, there it is. Can you guys see it? Yeah, the Boundaries That Set You Free workshop. So can't wait to see you all there on October 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And it has been such a pleasure and honor to be here with you all this afternoon. And I'm just so grateful. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.